Joining us on the program right now is our friend Pat Toomey, running for Senate in Pennsylvania. How you doing?
I am doing great. How are you?
Now, you're one of these guys I like to have on the program because you're just you're not a political hack. We could talk economics. We could talk about the health of our economy in this nation, and you'll put it to the people straight. When you see a political party who sees its political interests in growing a tax consumer class, that can't come with the general health of the nation.
No, and it's a pity that it's come to that because, there were many decades when many Democrats did not take this approach. John F. Kennedy stood up in front of the American people and talked about how lower taxes will lift the quality of life, the standard of living for everybody. There was a time when you could be pro-growth and still be in the Democratic Party. Now the party's clearly been captured by a liberal left wing that I'm concerned. You're right. They want to grow the number of people who are dependent, reduce the number of people who are paying all the bills, and just keep growing government. This is not a recipe for a successful society.
The website is ToomeyForSenate.com. Pat Toomey used to be with the Club for Growth. Now he's running for Arlen Specter. I hope your campaign people are looping that "act like a lady." I hope you guys are looping that over and over again in your campaign spots.
Well, we're not running any campaign spots yet. We've got a little ways to go before we get to that point. But I got to tell you, there are a lot of other people doing that for us. There's been a lot of exposure to that.
It should be "act like a lady." Vote for Pat Toomey.
Well, I think that people will connect those dots. He's really he's just way out of touch and out of step. I mean, who talks like that to somebody? I mean, it's so patronizing and condescending and so arrogant.
Let's get back to the Kennedy era Democrats. You're running in Pennsylvania. You would have to. Pennsylvania is still by and large a blue collar, not necessarily socially blue state. It's still considered a blue collar state.
Sure.
You've got steel, you've got mining, you've got a lot of what I call calloused hand Democrats.
Yeah.
Back in the 1960s, John F. Kennedy saw globalization, and he saw modernization as a way to combat globalization, and went before a joint session of Congress in 1961 and said, if we want to compete, we have to reduce the tax burden on business so they can grow and hire more Americans. There was a time when Democrats understood that the working man couldn't get a fair shake if he wasn't working.
Exactly right. There was a time when there were many Democrats who understood that business is not the enemy of America, for crying out loud. It's a source of jobs and prosperity, and that the private sector has to pay all the bills. Ultimately, government doesn't create wealth. Governments, they can destroy wealth and redistribute wealth, but ordinary men and women who get up every day and go to work and make things and provide services. That's where prosperity comes from. I think John F. Kennedy understood that completely, and unfortunately, that thinking in the Democratic Party, among elected Democrats anyway, seems to be hidden in a closet somewhere. I just don't hear that message coming from elected Democrats.
Now, where along the way do you think that got lost? Because when I look at speeches given by JFK, when I look at speeches being given by old-school Democrats on up to Reagan, who had the Reagan Democrats, it seemed to me there was an understanding that economic health came from a symphony of profit-driven individuals, small businesses, and companies all getting together to engage in beneficial transactions. And when that happened, when you had small business, big business, individuals, people making money and spending money, the government, too, saw its revenues go up.
Yeah. Well, exactly. And of course, that's the irony of it. If they understood the dynamics better, they would realize that all problems.
But wait, where along the way do you think this happened? Because you're obviously coming up with messaging to take on Arlen Specter in Pennsylvania. Where along the way do you think that Democrats lost their way with understanding how the economy benefited everyone when the government didn't overburden the economy?
It's a good question. I don't know that I've got a great answer as to exactly when that became the dominant thinking within the Democratic Party. My gut tells me it was probably during the 1970s, when a time when we even had Republicans who lost their way on this. I mean, remember, Richard Nixon imposed wage and price controls. I mean, clearly a terribly bad policy for economic growth, and he was a Republican. So we were mired for a full decade. Jimmy Carter's economic policies were disastrous. We were mired for a decade in economic misery, often thinking that, well, maybe the Soviets didn't have it so wrong. I used to hear people say that. And it took Ronald Reagan to really restore the common sense, and it's not a coincidence that he was enormously popular and enormously successful.
The website is ToomeyForSenate.com. The reason why I'm kind of needling you on this is because I know you from the Club for Growth, and I know that this is where your strength lies. And I think the voters of Pennsylvania need to hear this. They need to understand this, that class warfare never benefits the lower classes. It never benefits the working man. That class warfare is just a political game designed to get certain people elected. It's about control, not about growth. And growth is good for everyone. And what's funny is they say, you got to get over Reagan. You got to get over Reagan. Reaganomics, trickle-down economics. Wasn't it JFK, a Democrat, who said a rising tide lifts all boats?
Absolutely. And there are significant segments of John F. Kennedy's speeches where if you weren't watching it, if you were just reading a transcript, you wouldn't know that it wasn't Ronald Reagan. So I don't for a minute think that we need to forget about Ronald Reagan. He taught us some important lessons. But let me go back for a minute about the message. You see, I don't think that Pennsylvania voters need for me to tell them about the fallacies and the trap of class warfare and ever expanding government and attacking the productive private sector. They already get that. And I think my message is to make sure that they understand who I am, where I come from, what my record is, and where I want to take our Commonwealth, our state, and our economy. And I think a big majority of them, Andrew, they agree with us. I run into people every day who are not particularly political, who are appalled by what they see happening in Washington. Some of them will tell me, they say, look, I voted for a change in 2008, but boy, this isn't the change I had in mind. And so I think it's a function of myself becoming known, so that people understand where I'm coming from and who I am, my background in small business, for instance. That's what it's going to take, and I think that's going to lead to a victory in this election.
All right, we're talking to our friend Pat Toomey, formerly of the Club for Growth, now running for Senate in Pennsylvania as a Republican. The website is ToomeyForSenate.com. Do you fear in any way, because, and not I'm using the phrase game change, not related to the book, Republicans in Connecticut had to change their strategy when Dodd announced at the last minute. I mean, they gamed their strategy against Christopher Dodd, and now Dodd is pretty much done for. Do you fear that there'll be a last-minute effort to remove Arlen Specter?
Well, hard to say. I mean, I don't know that Arlen Specter wins this primary. I think his credibility is so damaged. I think voters are very skeptical, and they have a hard time trusting him, and that's voters of either party. I mean, why would Democrats believe that this man's conversion is in any way sincere when he admitted that it was motivated by the fact that he couldn't win a Republican primary? So I don't know that he wins the primary, but I really think that whether it's Arlen Specter or Joe Sestak, they both voted for all the bailouts. They both voted for all the stimulus, and they think we need more stimulus. They want higher taxes, more government, cap and trade, deny workers a secret ballot, government takeover of health care. They are both signed up for that entire program and more, and it's just so far out of step with where most Pennsylvanians are that I'm really not worried about who wins that primary. I think we're going to prevail against either one.
Now, the funny thing is, you're hearing Democrats, they're still blaming Bush, and they're sort of, chiding at the idea that, well, you're going to hand it back over to the people that made it this mess in the first place. But if you look at a lot of the people who were running as Republicans, they weren't in government when this was supposedly done to the people, quote unquote, by Republicans. You look at Kentucky, you got Rand Paul, you got Florida, you got Marco Rubio, Texas, you have Michael Williams, Pennsylvania, you have Pat Toomey. You have people running in for these seats that were not the quote-unquote Republicans that the Democrats claim were responsible for all. This is a whole fresh crop of people.
Well, that is certainly true, but it's also the case. I think we really have to look at what did get us into this mess. I think a big part of it was a failed monetary policy on the part of the Federal Reserve, which created a bubble and created a credit bubble, led to a housing bubble. A big part of the problem. A big part was the federal legislation that encouraged people to buy homes who weren't ready to buy a home. The idea that everybody should buy a home, whether or not they have any money in savings, whether they have any ability to sustain an economic downturn, whether they have any equity, I think that makes no sense. Then you had federal legislation forcing Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac to buy subprime mortgages, forcing them to lend money to people who probably wouldn't be able to pay them back. Now, it seems to me that the people who were big advocates of those policies, Barney Frank and Chris Dodd come to mind, they were at the helm. And they were, even when they weren't in the majority, they were advocating for these policies. So I think we need to be clear-minded about what got us into this mess.
What are you looking for tomorrow in the State of the Union? All of a sudden, Obama is acting like some big budget hawk. It's his own budget that he's talking about. This is his budget.
This is fascinating. I mean, I'm curious as to how he's going to square this circle and how he's going to make this consistent. This is the president that gave us this massive stimulus bill, as you point out, proposed unprecedented size deficit in his spending plans, and he said, quote, "We've got to spend our way out of this." Now he's advocating for a freeze. Well, does he think we're out of it? Or has he given up on the idea of endless borrowing and spending? I hope it's the latter. If that's the case, then let's rescind the unspent portion of the stimulus. Let's end the TARP program and just put that to bed for good. I want to see if he really understands that borrowing and spending is not the source of prosperity, in which case we could have much better policy going forward. But we'll find out when we hear the details.
Now, it seems to me the Democrats are playing on emotion. We saw yesterday on CNN one of the anchors was holding up a book, and it was a 1,000-page book written of success stories of the stimulus, and it was, anecdotal stories like, Mrs. Johnson's fourth grade class got a computer. How could you oppose that? And we're seeing the constant propping up of police officers, firefighters, and EMTs and public school teachers. You sound like an ogre when you oppose that, but by and large what I see, and tell me if you agree, is we're ignoring the fact the government is buying labor that it doesn't need at a price it can't afford and that won't bring a return on investment.
Absolutely right. And see, I'm really, the reason I'm so confident about the future of our country is that I think people get it. They understand. You know what? If the federal government goes out and spends $1 trillion, of course they're going to create some jobs with that money. It's all the jobs they destroy by taking $1 trillion out of the private sector that we've got to be concerned about. And the fact that on balance they end up doing more harm than good. I mean, the people, I think, get it. Sure, you could grow government. You could increase the workforce in state capitals and the federal capital. Who's going to pay for all that? It's the people in the private sector, and so I think people are not fooled, and they've got this spin that they've got on their stimulus, but I don't think they're fooling anybody with it.
One of the things that I see, and tell me if you see this, we're talking to Pat Toomey. The website is ToomeyForSenate.com. He's running in Pennsylvania, formerly with the Club for Growth. That Obama said that they weren't here to kick the can down the road, but when you borrow $787 billion, and it is $787 billion of borrowing, you're ignoring the time frame that you have to pay it back. So, yeah, you created a job today and you built a road today and Mrs. Johnson's fourth grade class got a computer today. But what about when that bill comes in? Let's talk about the kids who are in Mr. Smith's eighth grade class 4 years down the road.
Oh, but I would argue that you are destroying the jobs today and tomorrow, because when you take that money out and you hire that government worker with the borrowed money, that money had to come from somewhere, and it was money that would be saved and invested with the private sector company in the alternative. Not only do we impose this burden that costs jobs down the road for the people who have to pay higher taxes to pay the money back, but even in the meantime, we've taken the cash out of the private economy, which means we are destroying the ability ability of business to expand and create private jobs from day one.
Now, one last thing before I let you go. Once again, we're talking to Pat Toomey. The website is ToomeyForSenate.com. The assumption here, and you're seeing this coming from left-wing pundits, that what the government is doing in essence by borrowing and spending $787 billion by creating these government jobs, that they are quote unquote supporting demand, in that, you know, the government, all these workers on the road crews are going to go out, spend their money at the local tavern, and the waitress will have tips, and that they're trying to make this trickle up thing, I guess, or trickle out thing, or that if we put this money into play, it will be spent. But if they're also threatening the businesses where these people are going to spend their money, let's say, you know, we're going to go after Walmart, and we're going to raise taxes through a VAT tax and through cap and trade, and we're going to take over on the auto industry. If they're going to go ahead and raise taxes on the corporations where these people spend their money, they're going to raise their prices to compensate. Why would any company want to be business friendly if they know in the end any money they make is going to be taken away from them?
Right. No, they are having a chilling effect on business because of all the attacks and the threatened attacks on business. Here's the other thing to keep in mind. You know, if all you have to do is spend more money, if for the government to spend more money to get back to prosperity, why, then recessions would be a laughing matter, right? It'd be the easiest thing in the world. And we certainly couldn't be in one now because we're spending a staggering amount of money. So you can't just conjure up demand from the clear blue sky the way they think they can. It's all about production. You can only consume when you're producing. We have to be a productive society creating output, and that's going to come from the private sector. That is enhanced by incentives that encourage investment, encourage risk-taking, encourage growth of business. And, you know, when we figure that out, we can restore economic growth. But we got to get off this path that we're on.
I agree with you. All right, Pat Toomey, thanks for coming on the program. The website is ToomeyForSenate.com. We'll be talking to you throughout the year.
Thanks for having me, Andrew.